You mentioned also the Tibetan and Nepalese kind of routes. Which one is considered the harder route? I mean, is there one that's harder than the other? I know there's some are easier to do because that it's more diplomatically easy to get a pass to go on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Nepal is such a poor country that their, major part of their GDP is the tourism. So they'll always figure out how to make things work to get
Mm.
their money. Tibet's not so much, so it's more difficult to get in. Plus, I haven't done Tibet, so again, back to my earlier comment, but I know plenty of people that have. Um, it seems like the weather is quite a bit worse on the northern side, just the way that that where they're exposed and the weather comes in. You drive to base camp, so you don't have to hike in that far.
Hmm.
You have the second step, which is like a ladder right near the summit, and that can be a little sketchy, when you're trying to work a little technically getting up something like that, because if you fall, you're falling for a couple miles. But on the Nepalese side, just to me, it just seemed more interesting. And I've heard that it is more difficult just from a technical perspective, just because you're going through the Khumbu icefall
Mm-hmm.
multiple times, going through the Western Khum where there's like five ladders tied together with this bottomless crevasse, and
I
then you're
see
going
those
up.
photos of that, and I'm like, what are they doing? They're climbing over these crevasses on a ladder. That's insane.
Genius, huh? I know, like back in the day, they would bring like logs and like try to like throw a log across. Like
That's so
see, like at the
crazy.
Pacific Northwest, where they're spinning on the logs with their spikes. That's what I would say. That thing just spins. I don't know how you'd anchor that thing down.
Yeah. Who wants to be the first guy across? The anchor the
Yep.
rope on the other side. Like,
Paper, rock, scissors.
it's something like that. You talk about the icefall area, and it's ever changing, right? Because
Hmm.
it's so even if you go back, it's not going to be what you remember. It's going to be like a completely different obstacle, correct?
Yeah, every time I went through, it was different. So they employ like they employ like five icefall doctors, they call them. So Sherpa, that's all they do. They don't really go above that. Every safe day, they'll go through and reroute, or fix the route. I went through and it looked like a bomb went off at one point, like totally different. Ladders are just like broken, but then kind of tied back together. One day you might have to like ice climb up, a 50-foot wall, rappel down it. The next, that whole thing's gone and you just walk right through.
Mm-hmm.
So, even like these little pyramids had collapsed, on the way up. I went up and coming down, like, huh, this is different.
That's
And
crazy.
even one of them, there was like four ladders tied together, and I was by myself a lot. Like I went through this like by myself, and crossing this ladder, you have like ropes that are anchored on the other side, so you can connect into that and like hold it like for the stability. Well, that thing, I was halfway across, and the whole anchor came loose. So I was just like freestanding over this crevasse where I couldn't even see the bottom, and I remember just laying down and on it, and like crawling across. Like there's nothing glamorous about mountaineering by any means. It's a crawl, whatever, to get across. It's all survival.
That's wild, dude. That's like something that would happen, and I'd be like, you know what? Maybe not. Maybe I'm good. Maybe I'm,
Right. It's a sign.
like
Yeah, I'm not smart enough to recognize the signs.
you just have to like you have to put that aside and go, you know what? It's okay. I almost fell into a couple 100 foot, thing where no one would have ever found me, but it's fine.
Totally fine.
It's fine. We'll just come up tomorrow and do it again. It's cool.
Yep.
Um, yeah, you mentioned you have to go through it multiple times. I think that's something that people that don't really know much about Everest kind of understand is that as you're doing that acclimation and you're going up, you're going down, you're going up. What is from the time you got to base camp to the time you made it to the peak? How many days were you on Everest?
From base camp.
Yeah.
So the whole expedition is 2 months. So you figure it took a little over a week to get to base camp. So then the remaining portion of that is there, and that's a month of acclimating. That's going up, touch camp one, come back down, sleep for a few days, go up, bypass camp one or sleep there. I slept there. It was Easter, and I watched The Empire Strikes Back. I had a little mini
Nice.
laptop, and then went up to Camp 2, touched it, came down, and it's just kind of this yo-yo until you go up, stay a night at Camp 3. And Camp 3 is on this, that's where you see the tents on the side of the cliff, the ice
Hmm.
cliff that are just anchored in there. So if you, yeah, you don't want to slip there. So you're pretty much always just kind of roped up and everything's just attached to the ice wall. But when you're in the tent, you can't even tell until you open the vestibule and you're like, oh gosh, we're up here.
Don't mess that up. Can't just step out and use the bathroom real quick.
No.
No.
You just arc it out.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah,
And
you bring
it,
a bottle. So I had like a Gatorade bottle or whatever. You want to make sure you get the right bottle. So you go
yeah.
take a swig of.
Oh yeah, that would be no good. Um, and so every day you're just learning more about the mountain. You're learning more about the path you're taking and stuff like that. And as someone that's been doing mountaineering for a while at this point, and this is like the pinnacle for a lot of people. What did it feel like to actually be working your way through these iconic areas of Mount Everest?
Yeah, it's surreal. So yeah, I've read all the books that you've read, and anytime you read a book, I think in your mind you put the characters, you just form a character. It's the same with, depending how they describe an area, you form this in your mind. And all of that was different. So I had it in my mind, like even like the ice fall was on the opposite side of camp type of thing. So it was like it just felt all like, I don't know, just shattered all of my own thoughts, but it was so surreal to just create these impressions and these, where you have limited time and you want to like capture it all and embrace it at the same time, get it done with. It's like this extreme, both ways. But it is amazing when you're on these things and you've read these books and these stories, and I've followed other climbers and their amazing experiences, and just to be walking there, and at the same time some of those amazing guides are still there, and I'm interacting with them as we're passing each other on different areas. So yeah, it was awesome, I guess, to sum it up.
Yeah. So when it gets to the day, the summit day, what's going through your mind? Like today's the day, we're ready to go. Let's get this, let's get going.
Yeah, it is nuts because I've summited, I've soloed a lot of mountains. What's interesting is my job. Flashback to the military. My job is one of very few where we're on our own.
Mm-hmm.
You jump from the helicopter. In most jobs you're a part of a team, and we're still part of a team, the air crew. But once I'm in the water, it's me. And it's might be hand to hand, with a survivor who's, not happy or whatever. So I think I'm just comfortable in that. So I train a lot by myself. I've soloed a lot of mountains myself. So I was on the mountain quite a bit by myself, but Pasong was with me and heading up towards the summit. So you actually start at Camp 3. So you don't spend too much time at the high camp. That's in the death zone, the South Col at 26,000 feet. So when we were heading up, you got to go another mile just straight up this rock and ice face. And there was like 70-mile-an-hour winds. It was legit. Most people, there was a couple groups that attempted the summit. I think a couple did make it. The Japanese climber I mentioned earlier did not. He passed away. But most people retreated and they were heading down. But we had triangulated the weather, and the next day would be sufficient for a summit. It's just, you get some crazy weather up there, and you have to, there's only a couple days where you can summit on Everest. Because the monsoon season comes in and you just get these crazy winds and weather. So going up, it was tough, because it seemed like every step forward, it was just, you had to time it within the wind gusts of like pushing you back, but you just take a step, hunker down, take another step, and it just took a while. So a lot of times, you're not even thinking about just how surreal the fact that you're actually making a summit push is. It's like, I just need to get to point B.
Hmm.
Like, so you just, break these little milestones down and just, accomplish these little goals. But that's where I had ended up cracking my goggles. Do you want me just to get into
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
Okay. So I got about, I think it was like 1,500 feet above Camp 3. So I'm still on this ice face, and the weather would just fluctuate. And that's what's crazy is as soon as a calm comes, you're roasting because I'm in this full down suit, oxygen goggles, gloves, massive boots that go up to your knees, crampons, harness. I'm attached to this rope, and as soon as it stops, it's like 80 degrees. So you have to really like kind of unzip and just make sure you don't go from like sweating to hypothermic to so you're totally just managing this whole scene, this personal scene, because everyone's body is different. So I stopped to get a drink and I anchored off, and again I'm like on this wall, and as soon as I anchored off, I had a carabiner with like some webbing into an anchor point. I have to remove my mask and my goggles and my mask to then, be able to find my mouth so I could actually drink. Well, as soon as I'm there, my foot slipped off and my goggles released from my hand because I had put them around my wrist, and they're gone. They're heading down the mountain. I'm like, crap, because you don't typically bring extra goggles. Like I will on like I did in Antarctica. Well, now I will, but in Antarctica and at different places. But it's not usually because you're gonna lose them or whatever. It's because they freeze. So you just alternate goggles so you can have like a less frozen pair on. But they went down, and I thought they were gone. But looking down, like about 1,000 or 500 feet, probably there was some Sherpa that were coming up to a higher Camp 3, and they were waving at me, and they were like pointing that they got the goggles. So that's a miracle in itself.
Hmm.
So I told Pasang, you go up to high camp. I'm going to rappel down. So I left my bag, my oxygen, everything. I wrapped down, got to them. And when I saw them, they were cracked so goggles have two lenses. The internal lens was cracked. So I put them on. And then with the contrast of my warm breath and the cold outside, they were freezing between the layers. So I couldn't really see too well, but I donned them and I continued up, climbed back up, got my gear and kept moving. I eventually just ripped out the internal lens that was cracked and just tossed it. So then effectively cut their effectiveness in half. So not realizing at the time, and I have blue eyes, so I'm more susceptible to the bright lights. So made it up to high camp, 26,000 feet. Searched for Pasang. There's a few tents. A lot of them were collapsed just because of the high winds, and found him. And then, we made some radio calls just to make sure we were good to go for that night. Because on highly glaciated peaks, you climb through the night because that's when the ice is the most frozen. Once the sun comes up, things become very unstable. All those anchor points are metal. So those are conductors of heat, so they can melt out. So it just becomes more dangerous, avalanches, everything else. So you always want to climb through the night, try to get to the summit when the sun is rising, and then use gravity to get your way back down. So we laid in our tents with eyes wide open, trying to get some rest. It's not possible because it's like, okay, we're going for the summit. And around 8, 9 o'clock, the sun went down. It was pretty amazing to watch the sun go down at the highest camp in the world. Took a couple pics, and then we geared up and started heading up. And from there, it's slow moving. And I don't think we realized at the time we were the only two people going for the summit on either side, the Tibet or Nepalese side. So again, very, very unusual because you only have a couple days where you can summit. There's only one way up, one way down, which is why when you see crowds, that amount of people on any other peak wouldn't be that many people. It's just when you're in a line, and everyone's, brave behind a keyboard, they make their comments, and that's just kind of how it is. In my situation, I was, it's just Pasang and myself. So it's pretty amazing from that perspective. So heading up to the balcony. So if you read Into Thin Air, there's a lot of stuff that happened there on the balcony with Beck Weathers and different people. And I started edging away from Pasang, and we're not roped together. We're on the fixed lines, and I got to the balcony at 27,500 feet about an hour before he got there. So I waited for him, just kind of hung out, and it's pitch black, but there was like an electrical storm way in the distance below me. Like it was just again, just amazing. I'm at the highest point. I'm the highest person in the world at this point, and just trying to take all this in.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually showed up, and he let me know he wasn't feeling well. So, and he said he ran out of water. And I'm like, okay, here I have extra. So I give him some water, and he throws up. I remember just saying, keep it. Like, you need this. And we had a conversation at that point. I figured we were done. If he's sick, we need to get back down. So we had that conversation. He's like, no, I'm fine. I just needed some water. And he has more experience on Everest than I do. So again, you live and die by the decisions. You make those decisions with the information you have at the time. So we continued. Went up to about 28,000 feet, which is where it starts getting more technical, and that's where he tapped out. He's like, I'm done. Like I'm gonna head back to the balcony, which is pretty close. And he's like, I want you to continue up. And I'm like, no, if you're sick, we need to go down. So we had this conversation at 28,000 feet, and I'm weighing out things like, how am I doing? I felt strong. I was doing good. How's the weather? The weather was no wind whatsoever at this point. So typically the wind will stop during the middle of the night, and it'll kick up later in the next day. Mm-hmm. So completely calm. Most importantly, can my friend Pasang get down? And he's like, no, I'm fine. I'm going to wait right here. And he, without hesitation, he pulled out an extra oxygen bottle, buried it in the snow right there. And he turned around and walked down to the balcony. And I turned around and started moving up the South Rock step. He ended up not waiting at the balcony. He went all the way down to high camp, which he needed to do.
Yeah.
He might not be alive otherwise. So, but that's the situation. So in that moment, it was the right choice. So I continue up and get up about halfway to the south summit, and I look out and I see that perfect pyramid being cast, that shadow of the sun rising behind the highest point in the world down over the Himalayas. It was just, I took my video camera, little handheld, and captured that. And I just posted that on Instagram. That's what I posted on my summit day, which is May 15th. Just an amazing thing, but my camera just froze after that. And I wasn't able to unthaw it for like a couple of weeks. I was so grateful that I got that, because it was just to be in that moment and to see that I'm so high up, in the death zone, 5 vertical miles up, and just, after that, just put it away and continued moving. Got to the south summit, which is degrading because you actually drop down and then have to climb up to get to the base of Hillary Step, which is, like a 40-foot rock climb. Mm-hmm. And usually a point of contention, because you're up there, and if there's a lot of people, there's only one way up, one way down. You got to wait.
Yeah.
There's no one there. So I just kind of bounced up that. And then there's this area called the Cornice Traverse, which is, it's a couple feet wide, and is literally a 2-mile drop on each side of you. So 2 miles onto the left into Nepal, or 2 miles to the right into Tibet. It's like you have these options. But I just kept moving forward, and at that point I could see the true summit. And it's a lot to take in. Like, you can work your whole life for something, and then it's there, and it's like, I don't know, everything's moving so slow, but it's so fast at the same time, where you cannot process it.
Yeah.
And knowing now, 13 years later, I still haven't processed it, and I probably never will. But then just taking those final steps was just insane. You're just there and you're looking around. You can go no high. I could go no higher on this earth than I was at that moment.
That's wild, man. And you got to do it alone. That just still blows my mind. That opportunity is something that, I mean, there's probably only a handful of people that have gotten to go up and experience the summit by themselves,
So in the Himalayan database, so they're very adamant about capturing the data of who climbs in the highest peaks. I haven't checked lately, but I'm one of two people to have ever had the top to myself completely on a given day. There's probably more. It's just documented. There's two.
Yeah, you bring that up, that database. I don't know if it was in that book or I read it. I think I might have read something about it in like Outdoor Magazine, but I remember they were saying that there's like an old lady in like the village that would keep the record of no one actually summited unless she said that they summited. Like she was like the record. Is that still the case, or how does that work? I mean, how do they confirm that you did it when you were at the top?
Yeah, she was still around, but she passed away just a couple of years ago. So yeah, I don't know who's doing it now, but I still, yeah, it was still a process. Like I had to submit pictures, selfies, times, like radio calls, like all of that. So yeah, it's good. I mean, some people, I don't know, with AI now, I guess you and I could get on the top right now if we wanted.
I remember a few years ago, someone got called out for faking it. There was they had a fake photo. They had a photo that said that, that they said they made it to the summit, but something in their photo like, no, you didn't. And so they weren't, I think they were actually on Everest, but they never actually summited. And there's something with the photo. I don't know if it was photoshopped or maybe the photo they took wasn't where they said they were or something like that.
Yeah,
they
it's
take it
crazy.
seriously. They should though.
Well, they should, but I mean, flip it around. Like, who the heck would lie about something like that? Like, for what reason are you doing it? Like, that's
I
just,
mean, fame, right? Or, some kind of notoriety. Imagine all the people that lie about serving in the military,
yeah, yeah.
And think of this
Well,
too. Think about the guys that are in the military that lie about the shit that they did after they got out. And it's like, bro, you did enough. Like, what are you lying about? What are you doing?
I know, man. Go to a therapy session with those guys because they're definitely trying to check some box that they never got from their family or something. I don't know, man. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so I'm not surprised that people would lie or fake it or whatever, but it's I do remember, and I always thought that was super cool that there was like a lady that she was like the one person that everyone went to verify if someone had been up. I saw a list online the other day, a website, but I don't know if it's like an official list or anything. But man, so how long did you spend at the summit?
Yeah, that's the thing, right? You could spend your whole life trying to get there, and you cannot stay for long, and that's a lot of summits. It's too dangerous. So I would I don't know time wise. I know it was less than an hour. I know I had time to make a radio call down, and like that was tough in itself. I had to practice a few times. Like I didn't realize how choked up I was, and I didn't want to like come across as like a, that was my
I'm no
voice
bitch.
breaking. Yeah, totally. It's funny the things you think about. But yeah, there's
Like
all the
anybody
camps.
would judge you. You're on top of the world. You just climbed Everest. Look at this pussy crying.
Totally.
How dare you be happy?
Well, that's me. But yeah, just made a radio call down and, talked to some people that were down at, one of the main people that was sharing the camp, one of my camps, he was coming up, going to make his attempt that night. So he was at Camp 3. And I'd been climbing with him and Lakba, his Sherpa, who had 5 summits at that point. And at that point, no one knew I was alone. So that radio call was pretty significant because he's like, congratulations. He's like, you and Pasang, be careful on your way down. And it was at that moment it registers like, oh, that's cool. But Pasang went down like over an hour ago. He's like, you're alone? He's like, yeah. He's like, be careful. And we had a conversation after, and I have it in my book, Blind Descent, their conversation, but he asked Lakba, who knew me and, had been climbing with me, knew my skill set, just how long it was going to take for me to get down to high camp. And he's like, oh, Brian, it'll be maybe 2-3 hours. and they wouldn't hear from me for 7.
Yeah. I can't imagine what they were thinking, like, I mean, obviously thinking the worst. You might be a little late, but once you start pushing that 5, 6, 7 hour timeline, they're probably like, man, it's,